welcome everybody, Zastorice, to the Haunted Hacker podcast. Anya, what number do you want this to be? I usually let my guests pick the number of the session. So pick a number between, I don't know, 70 and 90.
70 and 90. Okay, 81.
81? Okay, 81 it is. So today we have Anya vysotskaya, and she works for Flashpoint. And before we get started, I'll do a little bit of update on what's going on and kind of the news. So I just got done with a talk in London for Euroclear, which was awesome. It was 1,000 attendees, which was ginormous for a virtual event, I thought. Really good conversation, and there was a lot of discussion back and forth. I wanted to thank Richard Atkins from Euroclear for having me. Other than that, not a whole lot of updates going on. We have the Haunted Hacker 1-year anniversary on the 30th that will go through the 31st, 24-hour podcast. Not really sure who all the guests will be, but I'm sure they'll all be good. And this will be my last podcast in this location. And I'll be moving to a 100-year-old building in downtown, wherever I'm at. So with that being said, I'll introduce Anya, and you can tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your journey and what you're doing now, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
So the journey, I guess my journey is not usual for the cyber people. Whenever you talk about people coming to cyber and say, I was hacking the computers since I was 3, you know, or my dad brought me this old Mac and I was playing with it when I was a toddler. Not like that at all. So I was born in Russia. And when I was born, I'm not that old, but because it is Russia, when I was born, we didn't even have a TV. So I remember, you know, when I was 4, we got our first black and white TV. And of course, there was no computers. So the computers got introduced when I was in high school, and we played a turtle game. That was the first programming game. Probably people know about that. That's how everybody starts programming. Mm-hmm. My brother was really into computers, and he played Mario Kart video game. So one day I decided to see what it is. And then when I gained consciousness, it was already the end of the day. So this game sucked me in. And I decided it's probably not the best thing for me, as I was interested in people and animals, actually. So moving forward, my first education was in biology, biochemistry, / psychology. So that's what I was into. And actually my first career was in that too. So I was very interested in animals and people and how brain works. And I guess that brought me to cybersecurity eventually, because I'm a very curious person. And every job that I ever held, I would outgrow really quickly. So eventually I decided to think, what can I do that I would not outgrow? And that brought me to cybersecurity. And then I got my second master's while already in the United States, skipping a big chunk of my life to not bore the listeners. But yeah, so I decided to get into cybersecurity. I did the master's, and so while I was doing the master's, I started my first job. I worked at SOC, and that's where I kind of learned that the interesting thing in cyber is that we divide people a lot. So we have like a blue team and we have a red team. My idea was that that's probably not the most efficient way of doing things. And that was my first attempt of building the purple team. I think now they're more popular. The thing that surprised me was that it seemed that the management or the people who own the company, they were not very interested in intelligence itself. So the money would go to the blue team, and the money would go to the application security, and a little bit to the red team. But in terms of hunting or doing the intelligence, that seemed to be a luxury. So yeah, that was the beginning of my understanding what's going on in cyber, my journey. So after SOC, I worked for Trend Micro. I worked with zero-day vulnerabilities team, so that was extremely interesting. I was writing rules for IDS and IPS, but still, again, intelligence was the one that interested me the most, because I thought, so why are we reacting to things versus actually trying to do something against it first? And that brought me to Flashpoint, because Flashpoint is specifically focused on intelligence part of it. So that appealed really to my sense of curiosity, and to just I'm a very logical person, so if you constantly playing a game of whack-a-mole with the threat, something is wrong. So yeah, and right now at Flashpoint, I'm on the hunt team, and the hunt team is actually hunt for threats. So we look at what's going on in illicit communities. We parse this intelligence. We look at what trends are going on there, so we can actually advise people on what to protect. Right. Yeah, my recent projects are all related to ransomware, since it's such a big thing, and I have a lot to say about the ransomware. I have lots of opinions about it, and I just want to say that the opinions are my own, not necessarily any of my employers. So just want to preface it, but I think there are some things that we can change in the landscape to actually to not feed the monster.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you're interested in ransomware. I'm also really interested in ransomware, and I've got my own theories we can talk about later. I found it really interesting. You went to college at UT in Austin. You took some courses there or taught there. Is that correct?
Yeah, I taught there. So yeah, I got my master's into one of the online schools in the Capital Technology University. They actually have campus and they have online. So they're the ones that usually supply brains to the government. Right. And then I taught a boot camp at the University of Texas. Nice. This is a very popular avenue now for people who want to get into cyber, versus doing a 4-year degree or master's. You can get a boot camp and actually get an entry-level position. So that was very interesting. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, Texas. I spent most of my childhood in Texas, and that's where I entered into the military, was from Texas. So I've got a fondness for University of Texas, especially hook 'em horns. But yeah, it brings back memories of my childhood and from home. So you have an interesting view on ransomware. So you and I both share some commonalities, and the idea of intelligence, right? So people come to me all the time and say, "Hey, how can I make my company better? I have a defense platform I use. I have pen testers, and we make sure we patch." And I said, well, look at it as like a stool, right? And you have to have all the legs to the stool, but you're missing one. And that missing leg is intelligence. You have to have some sort of intelligence to be able to round out the security picture. And I spent, some time, a couple of years, actually doing intelligence for companies, not only just looking at new threats, but also getting into the underground and communicating with different people and finding out what was on different groups' radars and what they were targeting. How do you feel about, people working intelligence, getting involved in those groups to extract real actionable intelligence, as opposed to just watching the news or looking at CVEs?
Yeah, good question. So, of course, again, it's a gray area, right? So you can only do so much and stay within the legal limits. because you don't want to in any way to aid or abet, criminal groups. But even without infiltrating the groups or misrepresenting yourself, you can still get lots of information from just observing, going to the forums, and listening to the actors. I think in cybersecurity community, there is a tendency either to vilify the ransomware actors or make fun of them. And I think that what we should do, we should actually listen to them more, because usually your adversary tells about themselves, and that may give you lots of valuable information. For example, we got lots of good information from Russian hackers going and giving interviews to some Russian journalists as well. And in those interviews, they reveal who they are. They like to talk about their intentions. They like to talk about their fears. They like to talk about why they're doing it. And I think it is extremely valuable because if we know the psychology of this phenomena of the ransomware, we can actually protect ourselves and protect our clients better. We can design systems that would work and not just be in fear, because right now, I don't like this trend that's going on when people are saying now, it's not the matter of either, it's the matter of when, right? I think it's defeatist, not necessarily true.
Absolutely. I've seen that quite a few times, actually. And I just got done working a really long ransomware case, helping people dig out from the ransomware. And it's interesting looking at the dissection of the actual incident where, you had one group who was, a very well-known nation state actor. And then you had multiple groups that were working in tandem with that same group. So it's not only just, one group that is exfiltrating or running the ransomware. Sometimes there's multiple groups. And what really bothers me about ransomware is when people in the US and security companies in the US always point towards Russia and China as being the culprits. It's always a Russian ransomware group that ends up getting the rap for the compromise. But what people don't understand is that in the US, we do the same thing. We've been carrying out cyber warfare ops for ages now. It's not just, a communist or a Russia or China or whoever. It's everybody. Everybody has moved warfare into a cyber realm. And that's one thing that frustrates me is we focus too much on which country was it? Well, it's not really, forget about the country. Let's talk about why it happened and why they were successful, instead of putting blame on people. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you on that. So although geopolitical situation is important, it's still very much of a people problem. Actually, I showed in one of the panels that I did for the ransomware an example of how United States and companies, they actually seem to the hackers or to anybody who's trying to get the ransomware, right? So from the viewpoint of majority of the people in the world right now, United States is extremely wealthy country. And the companies in the United States, they just swim in money. And that's the perception. Not only that, but the perception also is that they're being arrogant in a way. So they're flaunting the money, they're flaunting their capabilities. So it's there. Here comes a person who doesn't have many opportunities in their life. And if, let's say, it's Russia and United States, right? If Russia and United States are not in a good standing with each other, then this person, the potential adversary, they know that they're not going to be extradited, that they're not going to face any consequences, and they can actually do something to make money, and ease money from their viewpoint.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the economy, the world economy, plays a big part of it. You know, they look at the US as being wealthy and flaunting their money. And I saw the same thing when I was living overseas, is the way that the US portrayed in foreign news, and basically the way that these companies portray themselves. And they're making themselves targets, basically. And the arrogance, you know, the Western countries do have a tendency to have a bit of arrogance about them. And you know, you couple that with the pandemic and the world economy and uncertainty, and people are going to do what they need to do to survive. And that's what I always say. But I found some really good information on ransomware groups, and this is my theory, and I've talked to a couple people in the agency, the CIA, about this specific theory, and that is that ransomware groups really, there's a tinge of a financial motivation. However, I think a lot of it has to do with intelligence gathering. I think that a lot of these ransomware groups ultimately are working for, you know, intelligence group within the government, or you know, consulting firm that's digging this intelligence. China was a really good example of that. I recently saw a ransomware case where they didn't ask for ransom, although there was a note there with the URL to go to. They weren't worried about the ransom, because as they were deploying this ransomware, they were also exfiltrating personal data of the executives and the stakeholders. So it had less to do with trying to gain money off of the ransomware attack, and more to do with building intelligence pictures and dossiers on specific individuals, because it wasn't like a wide target of collection of you know, personal information. It was a very specific set of people that were being targeted. And I thought that was really interesting, you know, because traditionally you would think ransomware would be completely financial. But I'm starting to see more and more of an intelligence gathering type operation along with the ransomware. And also I've seen a lot of variations of old ransomware that's been used to kind of veil what was actually going on in the background. You know, while people are fighting the ransomware, all their data is going out the back door. That has nothing to do with financial. And the agency seemed to think that that was pretty on point, that what we're seeing is not really a run or a cash grab. It's more of so a government hires, you know, a ransomware group is going to make money off of it because that's their goal. But the ultimate goal is to get as much data about specific individuals or specific companies out of the company while all the chaos is going on. Have you seen that with Flashpoint? Have you seen that type of operation before?
Yeah, and that's very interesting question. Since we do not, I cannot talk about specific cases here, right, for obvious reasons.
Right.
But about attribution, that's a very interesting point that you brought in, right? Lots of people, they want attribution. They want to know who exactly done it and why they did that. So, and that's where things become murky. Because as you said, it could be a case that the government hired that particular group, but this group may just moonlight for money. The people that wrote the ransomware, maybe not the same people who actually broke into the system. In fact, what we see at Flashpoint is that everything is very specialized. So there are people who specialize just in finding the access into the network. They are not interested in doing the ransomware. They're not interested in stealing the data. They're very specialized in finding this particular exploit that would get you into the network. What they do then, they would get this exploit and they would put them online for sale. And then other people would buy it. They may resell it. They may use it for their own malicious gains. Then there are ransomware writers. They specifically write that. Then there are affiliates. So if somebody wrote a ransomware and they like how it works, now they want to rent it out, not just sell it, but rent it out. Then with the data, the exfiltrated data. So the trend now is double extortion, as they're saying, right? So first extortion is for the ransom, for your data that are encrypted, and second is to not publish your data. But there is no guarantee that even if they're not published, they're not going anywhere else. So the actors may be double dipping, right? So they're getting money from the organizations and then they maybe sell it to their own government, you know, and in exchange, maybe government is not paying them money, but it's protecting them. So it gets very complicated. And I think that's where we should think less in technical terms and more in the psychological and economical terms, because we may be creating this monster when we're thinking that they're doing everything possible to protect. Are we actually increasing the activity by our actions? I'm curious to see what you think about it.
Yeah, so I'm against paying ransom. I think when you pay a ransom on a ransomware event, I think that you're letting them know that, hey, you know, our data is more important than our money. So, you know, you hit us, we're going to pay you to get our data back. And that leaves the door open for them to come back again because they know that you're going to pay and they know that you have the money. Other instances I've seen, you know, like you said, it's not just economical. Some of the attacks I've seen also have been kind of like almost accidental, like they don't realize what network they're in. And that gets confusing for them. And they put out, you know, like a ransom, like a huge ransom on a hospital. And people who live in the US know that those hospitals don't make a lot of money. Really, the thing there is private information. But there's a lot of state-run hospitals that don't have the budgets and don't have that free cash to pay ransoms, and they suffer. But I do think that we feed into it quite a bit. We feed into the machine. The more we pay ransoms, the more that we try to pinpoint attribution. You know, go back to the beginning of, you know, the internet and when attacks first started happening, and everybody was focused on finding out the IP address of the attacker. And now, currently, you look at, you know, how attacks occur, and nobody asks for an IP anymore because we know how easy it is to spoof that IP or to compromise a system and launch an attack from that system to make it look like somebody else. And I think we're going to get to the same point with ransomware, where, you know, looking at identification and attribution is not as important as why it happened and how we can solve that problem. But it's a global problem. A lot of people don't understand that. As the US does do their own, you know, attacks, cyber warfare attacks. I mean, look at Stuxnet. Stuxnet's a good example of what happened. No ransom involved, but we carry out the same ops. And, you know, I sympathize with companies that do get compromised. However, most of the companies that I look at who have been compromised, it's been really dumb mistakes, just really, really dumb mistakes that could have been prevented. Multi-factor authentication, strong passwords, you know, not buying off-the-shelf VPNs that are misconfigured. There's just a lot of things that people can do. And it's always going to be, I think it's always going to be a tit for tat, right? It's always going to be launching attacks back and forth. And it reminds me of those maps, like the Norse maps, where it shows the real-time attacks going on and all that nonsense. Yeah, I do think, I agree. I think we feed the machine quite a bit. So with that same sentiment, you know, feeding the machine, what are your ideas on how to slow down that machine or to break that machine?
Yeah, I'm glad that you asked. So, and I'm going to mention something that you just said recently about, it seems like some of the attackers don't know what they're doing. Yes, and that's the case. So there is a thing that is called ransomware as a service. So the people that are very, very smart, they create the ransomware itself, right? They write the program, so those are the programmers, the brains. Then there are marketing people who are selling it on the forums or anywhere else in the illicit communities. And then there are people that just want to do business. They may not know anything about the network, about the programming, even about the data. And because ransomware as a service, such a good business, it is easy to do, big money, very anonymous. So for anybody who wants to make an easy money that way, and they know they're not going to get caught because they're in a different country, they can get into this business. So what they do, they purchase this ransomware, which is pretty much plug and play. and they purchase access to the networks. And it's usually not just one network. If somebody thinks that the adversaries they're just planning to get into a particular network, and like, let's say it's a hospital, you know, and they try to find a way, no, that's not how it's happening. Somebody writes an exploit, then they do the whole spray and pray. So, and then they sell it. They don't know what they're selling because it's a bulk. So the person who is buying it, they don't know what they're buying. What they do, they push this ransomware or this exploit to every network that they bought. And they get somewhere, right? So when they get there, that's where they might realize where they are, or they might not. So it all depends on the sophistication of the attacker. So, and that's where comes the disparity, where these actors, we hear they say that we're not going to attack hospitals, we're not going to attack anything that is charity organization. So pretty much they portray themselves as being noble because they have certain, you know, moral qualities, and they might do, you know. People like to laugh about it and say that, you know, there is no honor among thieves, but that's maybe not necessarily true, you know, but the fact that they sell their product to somebody else who might not have the same morals as they do produces cases like that, like with the hospital. So the most recent colonial pipeline attack, right? You probably know that attackers then came out and said, yeah, sorry we did that, we didn't mean to, you know, and that's very unusual for the attackers, right? So that's flabbergasted lots of people. But there is actually a very logical explanation. And I just want to preface it that that's my explanation, but I think it is probably correct. Because those same actors, they went and they gave interview to one of the Russian journalists. And what they were saying is they do not want a high publicity attack. So what actually happened is that it was an affiliate who didn't know where they went. And when they did, they thought, oh, it's cool. It's a large company and they're going to pay lots of money. They didn't think that because it is such an important company, they have connections on the hill, you know, and then it's going to become an issue between countries. So I think that's what happened because, as you mentioned before, ransomware is probably not their day job. It's probably their moonlight, right? So, and they most likely connected to the government somehow. They got a phone call. They probably got a phone call that says, you know, guys, you overstepped. Don't do that. We do not want war because, you know, you asked for money. And that's what I think happened. So the question comes from here. Can we control? Yes, we can. Because actually in the colonial pipeline, we have two things that we haven't seen happening with other ransomware attacks. First of all, we got an apology. So, and we got an evidence that actors didn't want to do that, that was a mistake, right? And second of all, the money were recovered. So now we know that there are capabilities of tracing the wallet, you know, tracing the payments, and we can influence the policy. An interesting thing is that those same hackers in the interview, they said the tension between our two countries, between Russia and the United States, actually helps us. It helps us a lot. As long as there is tension, there is no extradition, or there is nothing in terms of us being punished for what we do. That's why I think we have Russian and Chinese hackers, as we talked at the beginning, right? Because if you are going to be doing the same and reside in the United States, there is almost 100% chance that you're going to be caught within a few months. So, and I think we need to rethink our policies. We need to rethink how we relate to each other. the one main reason why the ransomware monster became so big is because, and I'm going to say something controversial here, I think because it is a good business for everybody involved. It's good business for ransomware actors, and it is also a good business for the companies. I'm going to explain myself here why I think it is a good business. It is, and I don't know why we came to that, but it seems that it is cheaper for the companies to pay the ransom than to pay for the specialists to patch all the vulnerabilities, to patch all the holes and create 100% security. Why we are here, it is a good question. And I think that's where the discussion has to start.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I have my own theories when it comes to cyber insurance as well, liability insurance. A lot of the insurance companies I've seen, when an incident happens, it's almost as if they're telling the incident responding team, which is a different company, what to do and how to do it. And they focus on communication with the ransomware group, right? And there was one incident that I heard, the incident responders came back and said, okay, it's getting close to 5 o'clock and the ransomware group, they'll be finished at 5 o'clock and we won't be able to contact them. And I had to laugh at that. You know, it's such a business. It's such a professional business, and they've really honed their skills. It runs just like a company. But I have a hard time not believing that some of these cyber insurance companies, you know, there's a bad company in every batch of companies, just like there's a bad person in every big group of people, right? And I hate this theory, but I can't help but think it's true, is that some of these cyber insurance companies have relationships with those cyber actors, those ransomware actors. And it's a nasty chain. It's a nasty chain of events that everybody gets paid. But you're right, it's a good business model. You know, the ransomware group makes their money with ransom. The cyber insurance, charges huge premiums to be covered. And then the company has to hire an incident response team based on what the cyber insurance team tells them they have to do. So everybody gets paid except for the company that got hit. And I think it's really sad, but it's true. It's a working business model. You know, it's interesting you brought up Colonial Pipeline as well, and what happened there. And I think that, you know, when we talk about how we need to address the situation, how we need to combat ransomware, you know, obviously paying ransom is not going to help. Cyber insurance is not the answer either, because that gives everybody a, you know, kind of a security blanket where, oh, well, we don't have to be 100% secure because if we do get hit, you know, we always have insurance. So that increases the risk just within itself. So my theory is that we need to be more aggressive when it comes to combating ransomware, instead of just, you know, putting out indictments for ransomware groups, which they'll never be extradited. We need to go after the ransomware groups themselves and after their networks. If you can infiltrate that network, you could take down the infrastructure. Yeah, they'll move to another piece of infrastructure or build a new infrastructure, but the same happens when we get hit with ransomware. We have to rebuild. So my theory is the only way to really stop these gangs is to get involved and play the game, infiltrate their networks, take over their networks, tear down the infrastructure that keeps them going. Just like we saw, it wasn't too long ago, there was a call center in India that they were scamming people out of, you know, tons of money, and they had a surveillance system, and a guy hacked into the surveillance system and got a foothold in this network and was able to turn over the information to law enforcement and to shut down that group. So I think the same thing needs to be done in ransomware, is that, you know, select group of people need to go in and infiltrate those ransomware networks and get a foothold and collect all the data that we can and shut them down. I mean, that's my opinion. And it kind of goes along with the hack back, the idea of hacking back. Everybody fights against, and oh, it's not moral, it's not ethical, but we're dealing with people who aren't ethical, that don't have, you know, your best interest in mind. So I think an aggressive approach is probably the only way that we're really going to solve that problem.
That's a very interesting opinion. I think it's probably a little bit more complicated than that, because if you're going to try and hack back into the systems that are that belong to a foreign entity, foreign country, that's where it gets into very gray area. I think the government is trying to do something similar now with currency exchange centers, with the blockchain, mixers, etc. But they try to do it with the monetary compensation. So I think how United States done things that usually work is with the emphasis on money. So if you're going to put big fines on any centers that would make it easier for hackers to either hide the money, or anonymize in any way, then it's not going to be profitable. And since it's the business, I think making something not profitable would probably work. With the hackback, the danger here is escalation. Every time when you engage in a conflict and you escalate, the other party would escalate back. So I'm not sure if that's going to solve the problem. It might create a cyber warfare, and that's not a good consequence. Of course, this problem is a big one, but I think we should start thinking about it and talking about it. Because that's where the solutions come from. Because there are a multitude of solutions that are on the spectrum between zero trust and hacking back.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, I think. When you look at the FBI's most wanted list, and I always check it out probably once a month just to see who's popped up on the list. And you look at it and it's always Chinese or Russian military officers from the GRU. And it's like, first of all, that's a waste of time to even put them on the most wanted list, because you'll never indict them. That you'll never extradite them. So, I mean, they're just wasting their time with that. But I know that other groups, especially, I guess, rival groups, will put people in each other's groups to tear them down. And, I'm sure the government is proactively doing that now with some of the ransomware groups. But like you said, it's a business model, and the way that they operate, I mean, it's almost like Microsoft. You have your call center in case you have questions about the ransomware. I mean, it's crazy to see where we've came from the beginning of the internet to fighting botnets, and botnets was a big thing back then. And now we're fighting ransomware, and it's no longer, the hooded people that are causing the problems. It's legitimate companies. Like, they set up legitimate companies with bank accounts and call centers, and they invest time and money in this. This is not like an overnight, production. So what do you think the I guess the temperament in Russia is towards ransomware? Do you see ransomware attacks within Russia, let's say from foreign countries like the US or from England or whatever? Or is it strictly, you only see the actors working in foreign countries and not so much within Russia?
So yeah, good question. Actually, very interesting one, because I looked at so many ransomware families that are generated from Russia or former Soviet Union, and majority of them have a protection against being deployed in any of the machines that might belong to a person who lives in Russia. So they do not put ransomware on their own people. And the reason being is, again, that the United States and Western Europe is seen as this very rich, very affluent, capitalistic country. And the the sentiment of capitalism is very interesting, right? Because former Soviet Union was under the communist regime for 70 years, over 70 years, and people didn't like it that much. But, when it all fell down, we had our Wild West times, and people know what the wild capitalism is. And I think what's going on in the United States right now they're seeing it as people, just companies being greedy, so it's not a positive thing as well. I'm pretty sure that the majority of the people is not liking what's going on right now, right? With the economic situation, etc. When the rich people are getting richer and the poor people getting poorer. So there got to be some common ground. But when you are looking at the other and you make them as the other, and they're, in your view, they're very rich and arrogant, there is no moral dilemma of whether you can take their money and run or not. It's like we have this sheriff of Notre Dame, that is very bad and very rich. And then we have Robin Hood that is poor and just gives money to people who need it. So that's how they see it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, when you talk about, the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, even within the US, the way that some people like myself look at the government is they've, gone out of control. They take people's freedoms and, they tend to continue to get rich while everybody else struggles. So it's not really that different than, let's say, the way that Russia views the US and US companies. There's people here in the US that have the same sentiment. But the sad thing is, so like when Russia fell, a lot of the scientists and mathematicians and people lost their jobs because they were working for the regime. And once the country fell, once that communist regime fell, then all of those scientists, all those mathematicians, all those computer scientists had no jobs. And so what's the natural thing to do? I'm going to continue doing what I know how to do to make money. And I think that's where the transition into hacking and into ransomware, all that occurred, because, any country, when you look at another country and see how well they're doing and how stable they are, and you look at your own country and you're like, wow, why can't we have that? And what do I need to do to have that life? I think that's a pretty common sentiment in any country. And even in the US, coming back to the US, I had nothing. I had no bank account. I had no place to go. Basically, with nothing. I had a suitcase. That was it. And I look at people in the US and, they tons of money, huge houses, just ridiculous amounts of things that they own. And I always thought, how come I can't ever achieve that? How come they have all the money? How come I have to struggle? And it sucks because people in the government, especially US government, you look at their salaries, you look at what they get away with, and that fuels a lot of the crime, not only just in the US, but globally. Because I think we're on that tail end of being a superpower. They always say that every kingdom or every, superpower ends up imploding on itself, like Babylon and like Rome and stuff like that. Those big enterprises always collapse on themselves. So I think we're nearing the end of that I guess reign or whatever. And it's sad as an American looking at that, watching the struggle within the government and the people fighting against what they deserve and what they're actually getting. It's pretty sad. But I think under any circumstance, when people need money, they're going to do what they know how to do. And some of the Russian hackers that I've been in contact with and that I've worked with are very bright. They spend their days, their time, 24 hours a day if they have to, learning how to code. They're hungry for that information. And here, a lot of people take it for granted. So yeah, like the APT groups are very interesting as well. And, along with ransomware, the APT groups really aren't focused so much on ransomware. They're more focused on disruption and, taking advantage of the infrastructure. And really the ransomware gangs don't really worry me as much as the events or the incidents where a hacker gets into critical infrastructure and just kind of looks around. That to me is scarier than someone coming into your network and holding your network for ransom, because that shows true intent. They're after one thing and one thing only. The other, getting into critical infrastructure or into transportation of the food supply and not doing anything and not deploying any kind of tools. It's like, wait a minute, is this a warm up for a bigger attack? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, very, very interesting question. So That's true. That is very scary. And I think if you're gonna look at the truth of the situation, is our critical infrastructure is not protected. So the adversaries most likely already been there and have the back doors, because we know how somebody who had no intention to get into something like that, they can just get there by accident. Think about if somebody, actually has an intention. So ransomware is very big right now, and it's a big thing, big shiny thing, because it's related to money. But the actual scary stuff, of course, it flies under the radar. Yes, if you ask me, do I worry about the World War III and it's starting with cyber? For sure, for sure. That's why I think the escalation due to ransomware is so scary, because we don't want to escalate, and I don't think that anybody wants to escalate. So just being able to get into each other's infrastructure, it's a power game, and that's, I think, every major company is playing it. United States is doing it to Russia, to China. China is doing it to Russia, to the United States. We have these three major players that it's like how they call it, the Mexican standoff, right? That's where the balance lies. So I think that we all should work towards peace. It scares me a lot when some kind of government official comes out, and they come up with sanctions or escalation of any sort of thing, because the balance is very precarious right now. So Russia has been economically sanctioned, because I read Russian news, and I'm in contact with people who live there, just, my relatives. So the general sentiment is they're laughing about those sanctions, and while they're laughing, they're building their own infrastructure. They're building their own internet. They're building their own currencies. They're building all sorts of weapons. So I think just flexing from the United States, it's not good.
The sanctions have always been a joke. When you look at how the U.S. put sanctions on China or on North Korea, just recently that happened, and the first thing they did was go out and try to break into Bitcoin wallets and deploy, cryptocurrency ransomware. It's like those threats are very empty. And especially like with Democrats, right now we have a Democrat in the office, and they're good at, putting words on paper, but not actually putting any action behind the words. And people know that. And, when we sanction like Iran or we sanction North Korea, they don't really care. They're going to get their money one way or another, and they'll trade with somebody else. To be honest, when you look at the allied countries, we're not as strong as we used to be, and the relationships aren't as strong. You saw that with Biden, and a lot of the countries that we were allies with turning their backs on Biden because of his failure of the pullout in Afghanistan. So there's a lot of instability globally, I think, and geopolitically, that could cause some disruption. But I do think that the next war will be started on the internet. I think something will happen probably within the next 10 to 15 years that will spark some sort of conflict, and hopefully we can de-escalate. But the more that we see infrastructure attacks, the more we see governments being targeted and widespread attacks like SolarWinds, I think that we're setting the stage for that next realm of battle, which I'm pretty sure will start on the ethereal realm, on the cyber realm. So that's about all I have. It's almost the end of the hour. And is there anything that you want to add, or questions you want to ask me, or anything like that?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a question about your feelings since you were born in Russia. how do you feel about what's going on right now, with APT groups from Russia, and how would you feel if the war is going to break up, or if there's going to be an escalation or conflict? Let's say, I think before the war is going to start, Russia is going to do the separation move, like China just did, right? There is no Bitcoin in China, so they solved their ransomware problem. Right. How are you going to feel?
Well, so actually, I was born in the U.S. I am part Russian now, but I was born here in the U.S. But to be honest with you, looking at the way that the U.S. treats its people, and specifically the way the U.S. treated me and took away pretty much all my freedom, other countries were more, I guess, forgiving and willing to help me out and support me. My own country wouldn't do that. And my sentiment is, if something like that were to happen, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for me to find any sympathy for the US, because I know their games, I know their politics, I know firsthand what we do in military opposition and during wartime. And I can honestly say that I probably will not support them. And little known fact, and this may, turn a lot of people's heads, but I'm actually part of the Communist Party USA. I'm actually a member. I believe in that, and that I'm devout to it, and that's the form of government that I think that we need to go to. That way, nobody's left behind. Because right now, the people who have more, and the people who don't, your lifespan is shorter. You're not entitled to the things that the rich can have. Take COVID, for example. While I was in the hospital with COVID, I had just gotten back to the US. I had nothing. And my treatment in the hospital was vastly different than a patient who had insurance. They were getting the antibodies. They were getting better quicker. I didn't get that same treatment. I got them treating my symptoms and hoping it'll go away. So there's a lot of things in the US I don't agree with. And I wouldn't support them if they went to war with another country right now, because they have their own problems internally. And to me, that's a slap in the face to the people struggling in the US when they go to war with another country. Because if you can't sort your own problems out at home, don't go starting somewhere else.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah. I think the problems at home are now more pressing. In regards to the communism, I'm not sure what I think, because I lived it. Mm-hmm. I didn't like it. Right. I'm not sure what went wrong, why it went so wrong. Mm-hmm. Although, the sentiment is great, I think that, my general sentiment in regards to everything nowadays seems that we need to place more emphasis on ethics, on civics, and on understanding ourselves as humans, and calming down our nervous system from fight and flight.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, as far as people across the world, it's funny because I can talk to friends in Russia and we don't have a problem. We don't have conflict. So why must the governments have conflict? They're nothing but a representation of the people. The people don't have a problem. It's the governments that do. And the reason why, you said it earlier, it's all this, it's all money. Money, greed, and power drives everything. Well, Anya, I appreciate you being on the show. Thanks for accepting the invitation. It was a very interesting talk, and you're welcome back anytime. So
thank you so much, Mike.
Absolutely. Until next time, I'll see you later, and we'll talk soon. Thank you again.
Bye. Bye.